Okay,
I'm sharing my
perfect.
screen as
All
well.
right, so we are here. We're all here for building a martech stack at a small organization, and Ben is currently CMO at Redgate Software. And you've seen probably his bio online, but also just want to share that he's helping his company navigate through the COVID-19 crisis so that they are stronger once we come out of the lockdown. And with that, Ben, over to you.
Great, thanks Maureen, thanks Maureen. So hopefully everybody can see my presentation there. Yeah, and thank you for making the point about seeing us through COVID-19, because I wrote this presentation prior to the COVID-19 situation, and a lot of it is about, you know, that some of the sort of grand plans we have for putting martech in, and yeah, right now we're busy with a lot of other things, but we'll get back to this stuff when we're through that. Right, so what's this presentation about? What this is about a lot of the things that you'll see at a conference like this are about some of the great things you can do with marketing technology. But my point is that it's a bit different when you work at quite a small company. And so what I want to do is talk about the problems, the differences in how you make decisions. Just a little bit about me. So I'm the CMO at Redgate Software. There's some of my details. This slide is important. This is a little bit about our company. I guess the most important couple of points here. On the top left, it mentions we're about 389 people at the company. So we're not a company of 10,000 people. Just to mention, there's about 45 people in marketing of that number. And we have, 200,000 people, customers, individuals who use our software. And although we've got sort of 2 million users in our online communities, that's a sort of very broad definition. So, but the point is we're a smaller company. So the agenda, I just want to run through actually 3 factors that affect martech choices. These first 2 I'll touch on very briefly. Obviously, the strategy of your organization is fundamental. That goes without saying. There's a little bit I mentioned about the stages of growth, but then really I want to focus on this issue of size. I've then got a bit of a formula for how you work out whether a bit of technology is good for you or not. And then I think the most interesting bit, which is examples of things we've done well and things which haven't gone quite so well. And then a little bit at the end about what we're looking at next. So I guess I'll try this here. It'd be good to know of the people of here, just how big are your organizations? So I just in the chat section, if anybody just wants to say how many people work at your company, and I guess this is to help me really, because obviously the point is this is really focused on people working at small companies. So I'll give people a couple of moments just to add that in. So sort of quite a big organization. See if anybody else has got anything. Big organization, 10 to 100, okay. Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, as I say, most of this is focused on what to do at smaller organizations. So we'll see how we get on. An aha moment. So this is a key point for me. I went to a conference in 2017, and at the time we had a problem which is tracking the return on our marketing investments. What things were we doing? What was working? What wasn't working? How were we spending money on things? Sort of standard marketing problem. And we were looking at a piece of software which is an absolutely great piece of technology called Allocadia, which I guess a lot of people will have heard of. And we went to this talk by a sort of standard vendor talk with a customer, and they were talking about how Allocadia had transformed their organization and really helped them with understanding what worked and what wasn't. But then as he was getting towards the end of the talk, the customer said, we found that we really needed to implement Allocadia when the number of marketers in my department was approaching 1,000. And at that moment, I realized that although Allocadia is an amazing piece of technology, it wasn't for us. It was really targeted at companies who had enormous marketing departments. And he said, yes, we'd managed with spreadsheets up to then, but it was beginning to get a little bit messy. And I thought, we're so far away from that situation. where we still do a lot of stuff management of budgets, etc., and spreadsheets, and we're so far away from that point that, and it just made me realize the size of your company is such a key factor. So what is the problem with choosing technology? I mean, everybody's seen this slide. This is the standard sort of martech technology landscape. It used to be called the 5,000. I think it's like 7,000 plus now. And the problem is, how do you sort of navigate through this jungle of technology? How do you find a way through it? And I guess I want to start actually with this sort of bottom line up front. Is one of the biggest things we've found from the last couple of years is for a small organization, your job is to reduce that list of 7,000 down to one, maybe two, maybe three pieces of technology. And I'll talk more about this later, but it's so easy to be overwhelmed by different pieces of tech. Why? Why does that matter? First of all, a couple of things really. First of all, you have to have the basic foundations in place before looking for new toys. This is something we've learnt through a lot of pain and cost. But do you have your basic performance measurements in place? Do you know how your marketing machine works? Can you cleanly measure marketing originated pipeline, marketing originated revenue? Can you count the number of MQLs that you've created? These kind of fundamentals are really, really important before you start looking at more advanced things. And there's another sort of separate point here, which I think is quite important. Be very careful about your assumptions. So martech, a lot of martech fundamentally enables automation. So it enables you to take people out of the equation. But if you're automating the wrong thing, you'll make your business worse, or more likely, it will just make no difference whatsoever. I mean, a really obvious example that most people will know about is you can have technology which will automate your social media interactions. And if you don't know how to interact with your customers on social media and you put a machine on it, it could be quite damaging to your business. That's quite an obvious example. So how do you choose these one or two things that you need? So these first two things, I think, are obviously vitally important, but will be the standard for any organization. So strategy. So why does strategy matter? I do feel I'm preaching to the choir here a little bit, but very simply, strategy is about making decisions to do A instead of B. You have very limited resource and time. Time is a really important one here, actually. If it takes you 6 to 12 months to get a piece of technology into your organization and really working, there's only so many times you can do that. So it's not just about the cost of the tech. And your tech decisions really need to be based around a clear diagnosis, guiding policy and tactics. I'll give an example of this where we went wrong. But just as an aside, if anybody hasn't read this book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rummelt, I would strongly urge you to order a copy. We actually run a lot of Redgate as a business on the approach taken in this book. It's the best piece of work I've seen on fundamentally understanding what people mean by strategy and how to put a good strategy together. But I want to give an example of why strategy matters. And this is with a piece of tech called AdRoll, which has been around quite a while, a perfectly great piece of technology to help you with remarketing and so on. So we tried it out. We invested quite a decent amount of money in it, and it made no difference to our business. That's not because the technology is poor, it's because it was completely unaligned with our strategy. And at the time we tried it, we didn't really understand our go-to-market strategy for small businesses. We had some assumptions about how we reach small businesses, and we used AdRoll to try and speed up and automate some of that. But we were wrong. We didn't understand our strategy. We had a poor diagnosis of what was working and what didn't, and so that piece of tech didn't work, and we pulled it out after 3 or 4 months. But again, of course, if it does align with your strategy, it's great. The second thing after strategy is stages of growth, and this is really important. So at Redgate, when we think about the input of the marketing department, we actually have many different stages of growth, and this is quite standard stuff. But we always have a process when we're entering a new market of, is there a market here? What's the total addressable market? How are we positioning ourselves? How might we position ourselves in that market? And there are these series of stages we go through, and the growth stage on the right-hand side, which is, okay, we understand the product market fit, and we understand how we're going to reach that market. the point here is that that's really where the majority of the marketing department gets involved. In fact, the product marketing part of my area is involved in all of these stages. But really, when we talk about marketing technology, we only really use marketing technology at the growth stage. And the reason that's really important is, particularly if you're a very early stage company or if you're going into a new market, you don't need technology to really be getting up and running, investigating total addressable market. If anything, I would argue it's quite dangerous to be using technology at too early a stage, because you're going to be automating things that you don't really understand. So that's all great, but what about size? Size is the most important thing. So I want to illustrate this point with an example from a place I worked many, many years ago. This was a company where we only had 27 potential customers. Our whole total addressable market was 27 orgs. And we ran actually one of the most successful campaigns I've done for a while, which was we did handwritten letters to the CFOs and the executive assistants to those CFOs. And it's the most unautomated piece of marketing I've ever done. But it worked. Of those 27 companies, we got 3 leads, we got 2 meetings, and we actually got a deal out of that marketing campaign. But my point is, there's no bit of technology that would have improved that bit of marketing. And of course, this is quite an extreme case. I suspect there's very few of you that only have 27 companies you could ever sell to. But it illustrates the point that the size of your company and the size of your market you're going after makes a difference about whether you need to automate certain things. So I've got another opinion poll here. So I'd just like to know who here has actually heard of Redgate prior to this talk, of course. And by the way, I say we're not Red Hat. We get confused constantly with Red Hat, who are a company a lot more people have heard of. So I just wonder in the chat if anybody could, it's fine if nobody has, that's fine. But I just wondered whether anybody had actually heard of Redgate prior to this talk. Have now, yeah, fair. I'll move on. My point about this is it's extremely reasonable. I mean, we are very, very specific market that we serve, by the way. We're not a company like, Slack or obviously the likes of Microsoft and so on that everybody's heard of. But why it's really key, our size, is the potential impact of a bit of technology for Redgate, where our revenues are in the tens of millions per year. We're emailing tens of thousands of people. We're a brand that, I put this in hoping that this was right, but a brand that most people will never have heard of. The impact of a bit of technology is pretty limited, and every bit of tech that we buy has to make a very significant impact. Otherwise, all you're doing is introducing a headache for your IT department. Just a final quick point here. Your relationship with your IT department is pivotal to how well these things will go. And if you don't know who they are, you should go and make friends. They're really, really important. So how do we decide which bits of tech to use? So we use a formula. It's not this formula. This, by the way, is the formula for how the universe works. It's not this complicated. It doesn't need to be this complicated. What we actually do is when we're making a decision about whether to invest in the piece of marketing technology, we first split it into whether it's a foundational or add-on piece. So foundational pieces are things which are kind of long-term strategic decisions. These are platforms. So things like, do you need a marketing automation tool or not? Do you need a customer data platform or tool or not? Do you need a CRM system at all? These are very fundamental things that aren't about kind of add-ons. But add-ons are things like, okay, there's this nice tool that's going to help us with improving click rates, or there's this nice tool that's going to add a bit of extra info on top about accounts or whatever. For this latter group, you need to sort of start with, look, how many customers do we have? How many people do we reach? What's the size of our permission to market database? That sort of thing. You then need to look at what's the potential impact per customer, and then does this pay for itself? I mean, a trite example, but if you have 10,000 people in your permission to market database and an email automation tool claims that it'll improve click rates by 5%, if you did a calculation of all of those more engaged people and said, well, okay, if all of those more engaged people were to go on to become new leads and the rest of our conversion rates were steady, what does that actually mean for revenue? and whatever that is, halve it, of course, because these things never work as well as you hope. So, I mean, that's a very simple example, but you should be able to do a very quick back of an envelope calculation for, if this worked exceptionally well, would it actually pay for itself? There's an obvious point here as well. You have to take into account the costs of your time, your team's time, your IT department's time. It's not just the vendor costs for the annual cost. So I did want to then talk through just a few of the mistakes we've made, and, well, diversions, I'll call them, not necessarily mistakes. I've already mentioned ad roll, so I won't talk about that again. I want to talk a little bit about Salesforce and Zuora. So these aren't, it's not that these pieces of kit are poor or the wrong things for us. This is actually a lesson about how you implement things. So both of these bits of technology, we've made a mistake, which is to implement them and not stick to the vanilla implementation. So we have tried to embellish them in all sorts of ways. We've added on all sorts of clever things on top that allow all sorts of bits of tech to talk to each other. And that's been quite a mistake. You shouldn't be working around bits of technology. And I don't mean this in the way it might sound, but be careful of your clever folk at your organization who want to configure these things to death. Ideally, you're using these in the very vanilla way. So again, great bits of technology, but the mistake there was to over configure these things. And we're actually now going through a process of going back to square one with both of these bits of technology to sort of unravel some of the mess we've made. So I'm happy to be quite open here about some of the mistakes we made, and hopefully people will learn from this. Engagio again is an absolutely great piece of technology, and actually the reason I put this in as a diversion is it's actually been a really good stepping stone for us to go to where we are today. The one interesting thing about here is that actually they took away one of the most important bits of kit. So they sold to us the sort of whole platform, and then they took away one of the most important bits of it, something called Playmaker, and it's quite a big risk with a smaller vendor. So this is my personal view, but when you're a small organization, it is definitely worth investing in the bigger players, because they just have a stability and a sort of a long-term approach to their software. When they have a vast customer base, they're more likely to keep things stable. So I think that's absolutely fine. But so what happened with Engagio? We used it for a while, and we've then moved on to something else. I think there's a really important point here as well for marketing. For marketing technology, generally the IT work to implement marketing tech is much less than it is for other systems like invoicing or CRM or billing systems, because they tend to be a bit more peripheral, which is absolutely great. So we implemented Engagio, got a lot of value out of it, realized we wanted to move on, and we sort of could rip it out and replace quite quickly. So that is an advantage of a lot of martech. 6 Sense. So this is a good example of something where kind of our strategy and size was wrong. Again, these are all really great bits of technology, and I don't want to sort of undermine any of these things, but the issue here is this is kind of a mixture of strategy and size, because at the moment most of Redgate's strategy is about expanding existing accounts. We're a 20-year-old company who have sold into most of the large accounts that we could ever sell to in our target addressable market. Therefore, our job is to expand those accounts. Therefore, the value of a tool like this, which gives you intent data about new accounts who don't know you, is limited. And it's not that it's not great, it's just it's not particularly aligned with our strategy. So we've used 6 Sense for a while, and we're taking it out, but I think we will bring it back in when we're looking to go into a new market again, and we have no information about the intent of various companies. So that's again a thing where it's not about the tech itself, it's about whether it aligns with your strategy and size. So just to say, what are we looking at now and next? So this is just a grid of a long period of time. So just to say, in terms of our core platform, we went from Nearlane to HubSpot and we're now on Marketo. I mean, that's actually one of the core things about size. The reason we've gone from Nearlane to HubSpot to Marketo is nothing to do with how good those bits of kit are. It's purely to do with the size of Redgate, going from 100 people through to now 400 people and beyond. And that's why we've moved on to Marketo. We do use On24 for webinars and Marin for managing our sort of pay-per-click ad spend, but both of those are quite sort of small add-on bits of tech. These are the things we've tried and stopped: Add, Roll, Engager, and 6sense. But what's next? I mean, a key thing we're looking at now is some sort of customer data platform. So this goes back to my point about you should be worrying about the foundational pieces of technology. And I've just got to find a quick slide here about why a CDP, a customer data platform. This, by the way, is we don't have a funnel, we have a flywheel for how we measure marketing performance. You know, this is quite a standard thing from awareness, engagement of customers, consideration, i.e. creation of opportunities, purchase stage, and then the loyalty. And then you get this kind of loyalty loop as our customers come back for more. But we see a lot of our Marketo is what we use to heavily measure the awareness and engagement up to the sort of, you know, marketing originated pipeline. That's what we use Marketo for. Salesforce, of course, is the sort of great tool for measuring this stage, you know, the sales process. We use kind of MedPick and other things, and that's embedded into Salesforce. The thing that we're really missing at Redgate is this bit on the left, which is, do we truly understand what our customers are doing, how they're interacting with us, what they're interested in next? And that's where you need to start looking at customer data platforms. And that's why that's the next big thing for us. But it's really interesting. I just watched a talk earlier, the chap from Rosh Sanks from Adobe, about their use of Dun & Bradstreet Lattice, which is a sort of a CDP. And that's, again, a reflection. That's obviously a company which is bigger than Redgate. And so they've already moved on to that stage. But that's what's next for us. So just my final recommendations, and these are sort of rules of thumb, really. Manual first, then automate. If you're automating the wrong thing, then you'll just make your business worse at a much faster pace. Less is more. This is my number one piece of learning from the last 3 or 4 years. The fewer bits of tech you have. I mean, almost on a monthly basis now, we are ripping out pieces of technology we've put in. Insight Squared is the thing we're ripping out this month, by the way. Again, it's a great piece of tech, but not right for us. The business case for anything has to be overwhelming and 100% aligned with your strategy. However long and expensive you think it is to implement it, it will be double that. Please, that's even though martech is easier to implement than other technology often, it's still painful. You need to have big step changes. So with one of the things we don't do anymore is a piece of tech which promises, you know, a few percent uplift in X and Y, or, you know, cost savings of 30 or 40%. It's just not worth it for a small company. Vanilla implementations, you know, really strong business case for changing the out of the box implementation. Just quickly on this, actually, this last point is really important. Define your success criteria up front. Everyone says they do this, but why are you implementing a piece of technology? So why did we implement Marketo, for example? We had 3 big success criteria, which is about reporting on the performance of marketing to the board was a key thing. Managing the service level agreement between marketing and sales about leads and where they get to, and 3, working out what works, you know, the impact of a dollar spend in marketing. And those were the big success criteria, and we had those all written out before we did that work, and that's the measure we've used to assess whether that has worked or not. So that's it. Those are my details for people getting in touch, and yes, I think that's it.
Yes, I actually have a
question. Questions or Maureen?
I'm curious. I know you've been with Redgate for a while. How supportive has your exec team been on your journey here? Do they push back a lot? Do they take obstacles out of the way?
So I'm very, very lucky because our company, there's 2 co-founders to our company, and the one that now is the CEO is the chap that did all the sort of sales and marketing side of things from the start, and he's a sort of marketer at heart, so he gets the value of all of these things and of marketing. So it's never been, I'm in a very privileged position that I work somewhere where any requests for or any request based on an understand or on the importance of marketing is never blocked or a problem, because you know, our CEO at his heart understands the value of marketing. And of course that doesn't mean say you don't have to justify things. You still have to have the strategic understanding of why we should be doing certain things. But yeah,
I'm also interested, and if anyone else has a question, pop in, but I'm also interested, it's unusual. And I know good product people are big advocates of don't keep adding to the product, like take stuff out. So it's very interesting to me that you don't keep adding to your stack, that you're also peeling stuff out. When did you start implementing that methodology?
When we realized we'd implemented far too much. So there was a point maybe 2.5 years ago where we realized, so we had various problems. So somebody would come along and say, we're really struggling to figure out what we did in marketing to influence the lead numbers, the influence. And so we would add bits of technology on top to try and fix that. So, there's a problem, let's buy some tech to fix it. And it got to a point where actually having 3 or 4 bits of technology, none which didn't really work together, didn't actually tell you what you're doing. So what we've done is we've stripped it back down to say, right, we will use Marketo and Salesforce to tell us what works, and that's it. And anything we add on top of that, I mean, Insight Squared, I'm afraid, is a victim of that. We brought this piece of technology to try and show us what pipeline we were generating for various teams, but it actually just obfuscated the problem. It made it less easy. We should just be pulling that from vanilla reports in Marketo and Salesforce. So yeah, we're now, less is more is my mantra now. Less is more. And when all that stuff's working and the basics are working,
when it's all
then
working,
we'll
I think is the key there, right? And we won't be holding our breath for that because integration is such a nightmare. But fair enough.
And it doesn't have to be perfect.
Well, this was absolutely lovely. Thank you. And Ben will be around for anyone who has questions that might have been too shy to put them in chat. And I am still not quite sure where we're hanging out, but we'll figure that out. I don't know if it's in the networking or in the reception area, but Ben is available for any further questions. And Ben, thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Of course.
All right. Thanks all.
Of course. No, thank you all. Thanks for attending. Cheers.